Jasmeen Kaur was a beautiful and smart 21-year-old that originated from India. She left India to go live with her aunt in Flinders Park, Australia, with dreams of becoming a nurse. So, how did this beautiful and vibrant young girl, with her whole life ahead of her, end up in a shallow grave, buried alive? Well, I am here to break it all down for you. Hi guys, welcome or welcome back. Thank you so much for being here. It is so greatly appreciated. It truly is. Before we get started, let me give you my usual disclaimer. This video is for educational purposes only. Please do not take what I say as fact. Please always do your own research and come to your own conclusions. Next, if you have not liked, subscribed, or commented yet, please consider doing so because it really helps me out and I really appreciate it. Okay. 21-year-old Jasmeen Kaur was described as polite, kind-hearted, and healthful. She loved to cook and she loved to do her family and friends' hair. She was extremely hardworking and focused. She came from a very supportive family in Punjab, India. She was one of three siblings, and her father died when she was just 6 years old. And Jasmeen had to watch her mother work incredibly hard to raise her and her siblings. Jasmine would move to Flinders Park, Australia to live with her aunt and to attend university with dreams of becoming a nurse. 21-year-old Tariq Jat Singh was also from India and also moved to Australia to attend university and also worked at an elderly care facility. However, not the same one as Jasmeen. Jasmeen would go to Allenby Gardens Temple to worship, which was coincidentally the same temple that Tariq Jat also attended. So there are conflicting stories about this relationship. Some say that they were in a relationship and Jasmeen broke up with him, while others say that they were never in a relationship and that Tariq Jat was just in love with her. Either way, it is agreed that Tariq was desperate to marry Jasmeen and that she turned down his advances hundreds of times. She even had to file a complaint with police approximately a month before her abduction, detailing how Singh was stalking her. So, prior to the night that Tariq Jat takes Jasmine, he is seen on CCTV at a store where he buys cable ties, black tape, gloves, a gas can, and a shovel. He pays for the items with cash, then leaves the store with no one being the wiser. The day before he took Jasmeen, Singh also downloaded a map of the security camera locations in Adelaide. He also switched cars with his roommate and took the SIM card out of his cell phone prior to abducting her. So this was all very much planned out. March 5th, 2021, Tariq Jat shows up to Jasmine's work at Southern Cross Homes at around 10 p.m., right when she was finishing up her shift for the night. He zip ties her hands, blindfolds her, and throws her either in the back seat or the trunk of the car. They're not sure where she was, but she was not in the front seat of the car. Okay. He then takes Jasmeen on a 5-hour ride, 250 miles away from her job to an incredibly desolate spot. While there, Jasmine is still alive. Singh begins to dig a shallow grave for her before placing it inside of her and covering her up with the dirt. The prosecutor that tried the case said that Jasmeen was actively breathing and swallowing the soil while she was alive, saying that she inhaled and swallowed the soil and that it made its way as far as her lower esophagus. She said that the killing was an act of vengeance and involved an uncommon level of cruelty, finishing by saying she had to be aware in those moments of the helplessness of her situation. She had to have been consciously suffering what can only be described as the absolute terror of breathing in and swallowing soil and then dying that way. The prosecutor that tried the case said that Jasmeen was actively breathing and swallowing the soil while she was alive, saying that she inhaled and swallowed the soil and that it made its way as far as her lower esophagus. She said that the killing was an act of vengeance and involved an uncommon level of cruelty, finishing by saying she had to be aware in those moments of the helplessness of her situation. She had to have been consciously suffering what can only be described as the absolute terror of breathing in and swallowing soil and then dying that way. Jasmeen also had her neck cut with a knife that Tariq brought with him. She was reported missing by her aunt on March 6, 2021, after she failed to show up to work and her car was found still at the job. March 7th, 2021, major crime units speak with Singh. At first, he denies having any involvement with the disappearance of Jasmeen, but he was seen multiple times in multiple locations on CCTV driving that evening. Finally, Singh decides to tell police that he and Jasmine had an unaliving pact, but after he watched Jasmine do it to herself, hence the cut on the neck. This was all calculated. This was all so calculated. He says that he chickened out, got scared, and buried her. Here's the thing that this university student fails to realize. She had dirt in her lungs that made its way all the way down to her esophagus. Therefore, she was alive because she was breathing in the dirt. So she was not put in there when she was gone. She was still very much alive when she was put in there. This dumbass, I guess, didn't know that or didn't do his research that well. Then he would eventually agree to take police to the spot where he buried Jasmeen. When officers dug her up, they found Jasmeen's, which this is apart from her having dirt in her, apart from her breathing in dirt, and you can't breathe in dirt if you're already dead, by the way. She also had her hands zip tied, her feet taped and zip tied, and she was blindfolded. Why would all of that need to happen if she did this to herself? They also found Jasmeen's work ID, her clothing, and looped zip ties disposed of at a nearby garbage. Singh would eventually plead guilty to the death of Jasmeen just prior to the start of a 3-week trial. At court, Singh's lawyer claimed that he had fallen apart after the relationship with Jasmeen ended. Boo fucking who. Jasmeen's employer says that Jasmeen was a beautiful soul and was always so kind and sweet to the residents. Jasmeen's mother says, I regret the day I said yes to sending my daughter to Australia. I didn't know dropping her off at the airport would be the last time I gave her a hug. Before handing down a life sentence with a minimum of 22 years, the judge said, I could not describe the terror Miss Kaur must have been experiencing when she realized you were burying her alive. That drive must have taken several hours. Miss Kaur must have been terrified, and you cannot have cared. Outside of the courtroom, Jasmeen's mother says, Today I do not feel happy. I wish that Jasmeen was still by my side. I talk to her every day. I always say goodnight to my daughter. Justice has prevailed. My family and I have already started our life sentence, having to spend the rest of our lives without Jasmeen. How could he value a life so cheaply? I'm incandescent with rage. You treated my daughter as if she was nothing, and disposed of her as rubbish. Jasmeen's body was flown back to India so that the family can give her a proper burial. So, as I'm, researching all this, I think, what were her last moments like? What is it like to be buried alive? So I start looking to see if I could find any information on what it's like. And I come across two stories of people that were buried alive and survived. So, first man writes, it was 2002, and I'd been working as a laborer for about 5 years. I was 27 and pretty macho. How could anything bad ever happen to me? On this particular job, I was digging a water main with four other guys. One man would dig out the trench, the rest of us would put in the pipes, and the digger behind us would then fill it all in with earth. It was like one long trench, and we were continually moving forward, laying around 1,000 feet of pipe per day. There's something called a trench box, a metal case that holds back the sides of the walls to be used to stop them caving in when you dig deeper than 5 feet. Some companies use them, some don't. Ours was one of the ones that didn't. I thought I was bulletproof, and I didn't care if we had safety equipment or not. We were making good progress and getting well paid, so I never really considered the dangers. All I could really think about was my honeymoon. I got married a week before and had delayed going away a few days so that we could finish the job. Now it was Friday, about 1 p.m., and my new wife and I were meant to be flying to Canada later that day. I was down in the ditch, which was about 6 feet deep and 2 feet wide, mopping up some water. We hit an underground drain pipe. My colleague had gone back up to the truck to get some tools, and 30 seconds later, the trench caved in on me. I screamed, but I couldn't be sure they heard me, although I found out afterwards that they did. In less than a second, I was completely buried by earth from the walls, as well as the 4 feet or so of dirt that was piled up on each side. I panicked, fighting and struggling to clear the soil, but there was too much of it. I was covered. I couldn't move or see anything but blackness. Afterwards, they told me I had 2,000 pounds of dirt on top of me, the equivalent of being hit by a truck going 70 miles per hour. The weight crushed my chest and broke my ribs. I could feel myself starting to suffocate. I was desperate to hear someone call my name or the digging machine start up, but there was only silence. At that point, I thought there's no way I'm going to get out. I was going to die right there in the bottom of that ditch. After about a minute and a half, I blacked out. Jesus Christ. I haven't read this yet, by the way. By then, my colleagues were trying to dig me out. They knew that I was down so deep that if they'd start to dig with shovels, they'd never reach me in time. They also knew that if they went in with the digger, they might cut me in half. Less than 10 minutes later, they managed to get to me by scooping off some of the earth with the machine and then going in with shovels. 10 minutes. So that, oh my God. The first part of me that they spotted was my right knee sticking up because the weight of the dirt had pushed my head down between my legs. When they got me out, they thought it was too late. I was blue and had no pulse. Technically, I died down there, but the ambulance crew managed to save me. They put paddles on me, shocked me, and got my pulse going again. I was taken by helicopter to the hospital and put on life support. My chances of surviving were pretty slim. My family told me that if I made it, I'd probably have severe brain damage. Yet, within a week, I was progressing and starting to make a good recovery. It felt like a miracle at first, until the reality of what happened began to sink in. I started to have nightmares. I was scared of confined spaces and especially the dark. The accident changed everything, particularly my marriage. Can't go through something like that and be the same person. I rapidly discovered that I wanted different things from my life. I found it hard to plan for the future because I felt so strongly that it could be taken from me at any minute. Did you break my heart? I knew I couldn't go back to my old job. Instead, I went to college and got a degree in conservation law. Now I travel the world giving lectures on what can happen when you take risks. I talk to people about safety, and I want them to understand it's not worth taking shortcuts in any area of their lives. We got comfortable doing things the wrong way for a long time, and then all of a sudden we got caught, and that can happen to anyone. Story 2. I was buried alive in a shamanic ritual. Okay, for context, shamanism is a religious practice that involves a practitioner interacting with the spirit world through altered states of consciousness, such as trance. The goal of this is to direct spirits into the physical world for the purpose of healing or to aid humans in some other way. Shamanic rituals are a way for shamans to connect with nature and spirits. I never tried the common path. As a young child, I invented my own language, and at the age of 4, made my parents buy me a Kate Bush album. My mother was a strong willed gardener who spent much of her time trying to tame herself so she wouldn't frighten the neighbors. My father had battled mostly Blackshirt in East London, fought with the RAF, and designed furniture for Heels. And we all lived in Gower, South Wales, with its ancient wells and burial chambers. I remember going deaf when I was 5 as a result of adenoid problems. I told no one and happily sat in my own world until a teacher finally noticed I couldn't hear a word she said. When my parents' marriage collapsed and a bitter divorce followed, I felt even more removed from what was normal. My mother was devastated, and I hid my own misery so I could comfort her. I was always interested in spirituality, and when I grew up and moved to London, I learned to meditate. Then in 1996, my father died, and in the same year, 2 close friends also passed away. I started using cannabis as a way to escape the years of pain my grief threatened to unleash. When the new millennium arrived, I had a nervous breakdown. I stood in the shower, defeated by taps. I couldn't remember how they worked. I found language had broken. I was scared by the prospect of never getting better. But after being admitted to the hospital, I took the seeds of my meditation lessons and began practicing Tai Chi every morning. I moved to Brighton, learned reflexology and Reiki, and found my church in a weekly 5 rhythms class. Every Tuesday night, 50 people would gather and dance, not just as a form of exercise, but to exorcise whatever held them back. We would empty our minds and let ourselves go. Our teacher was an inspirational woman who worked in a shamanic group called the Sacred Trust. In a few months, I signed up for a 2-year course in shamanic practice. Part of this involved being buried alive. I got the email telling me what to bring for my first meeting. I began to fret over the logistics of how to get a spade, ground sheet, and a bundle of planks on southern trains rather than dwelling on what I had agreed to do. A group of 18 of us spent 4 days increasing our trust in each other. And each afternoon we would walk with spades up to a clearing and dig the 3-foot coffin-sized holes. That would be our individual graves. In the early spring sun, it all felt like a joke. But on the evening of our burial, my whole being shook with fear. We were told that this moment was a choice between fear and love, a letting go of the ego petrified of its own death, and an embrace of eternal life-loving spirit. We walked up to the burial ground in silence, and each brought an offering of wood to Grandfather Fire to ask that we see sunrise the following morning. One by one, we lay down in our pits while 2 others covered us with planks, and then earth, until all that was left was an air hole the size of an orange. It's kind of not the same thing. As soon as I was covered over, I felt the fear rise up in me like a devastating wave. To calm myself, I began to talk to the soil, to tell Mother Earth the story of who I was and what brought me here, as though I was talking to a friend I hadn't seen since birth. The fear subsided, and I felt I was in the safest place I could imagine. I sang, screamed, and wept. I asked Mother Earth to take back all the hurt that I didn't need anymore. I lay in my own grave and came to peace with the truth that waits for us all, that we will die and all our clever stories, habits, and prizes will come to rest in the ground to be transformed into something new and unrecognizable. When day broke, I was dug out and cried in gratitude for nothing more than living to see another morning. I walked in the ordinary miracle of day, and I felt rinsed through, clean as water. Everywhere I looked, life was phenomenal, an exceptional gift that I was fortunate enough to bear witness to. I'd walked into the jaws of death and was still alive. Um, I mean, you had a hole. Just not quite the same, sir. I am now a qualified shamanic practitioner. Burial is something I don't often talk about, but it's there in everything I do. For all the misery and suffering that's reported and circulated, I recommend a diet of anything that makes you feel grateful to be alive. We're only here a few summers after all, and we have a duty to honor this world as the marvel it is. The most lasting effect of being buried alive is I try to do one thing each day that scares the daylights out of me. The other day, it was painting in my sitting room magnolia. I mean, the first guy, yes. You kind of volunteered to do it. And you had an air hole, so there's that. So, while researching Jasmeen, I stumble across this story. And even though it starts off absolutely horrible, it has such a happy ending, and I thought it would be such a nice way to end this video that was so tough to hear. Okay. May 16th, 1998, fashion designer and NASA engineer Azita Malanian was jogging in the San Gabriel Mountains with her three dogs, Ty, Tango, and Boo Boo. She says that while on the jog, her three dogs, who typically stay close to her, bolted towards the bushes after something catches their attention. Azita initially thinks that it's an animal, but when she goes over to grab her dogs, she spots something pushing out of the ground. She runs back to her car and she places the dogs inside and she goes back to see what was happening. She says that she would get the shock of her life when she realizes that it was a baby's hand sticking out of the ground. She starts digging with her nails, and that's where she finds an infant boy wrapped tightly in a towel, placed in a shallow grave with the umbilical cord still attached. She picks the baby up, wipes dirt away from his mouth and nose, and begins to start praying to God to keep this baby alive. She flags down a motorist that's passing by and begs him to call 911. The 911 operator believed that the baby was already dead, so it actually took paramedics 30 minutes to show up to this call. And she says that while she was waiting with the baby in the woods, he grabbed onto her hand so tightly and he didn't let go of it until she handed him over to paramedics. She says that while she was holding the baby, waiting for police to arrive for 30 minutes, she told him, "Please don't die. I will never leave you and I love you." The baby was rushed to the hospital where he was suffering from hypothermia with a body temperature of 80 degrees, and doctors believe that it was the baby's weight of 7 pounds and 12 ounces that contributed to him surviving. The staff at the hospital would call the baby Christian, and offers to adopt him came flooding in. Okay, so I know what you guys are probably thinking, because I was thinking the same thing. Why wouldn't you just adopt this baby? But the reason Azita did not adopt this baby was because this was such a huge story. She did not adopt the baby out of fear that he would be found Probably from somebody in the bio family, is what I'm thinking. Christian would end up getting adopted a few months later, and his new family would change his name to Matthew Christian. Azita went to visit the baby a few days after she found him, and she says that she just stared at him in his incubator with tears in his eyes. And even though she feared adopting him herself, she would try to keep in touch with the baby and reach out to Child Protective Services several times. It wasn't until almost a year later that CPS told her that the baby had been adopted and that she could no longer get updates on him. Can we just take a second to talk about this woman who is, in my opinion, a walking angel from God? Azita is originally from Iran. She came to the United States when she was very young. She owns a clothing business by the name of Tuska Fashion. She's been helping children in orphanages since she was incredibly young. She has an organization called Children of the Planet, whose main goal is to supply women and mothers with sewing machines so that they could create clothing, sell it, and raise money for the orphanage. Like, oh my God, this woman. Oh, and she's a NASA engineer. We forgot that. After the baby was found, police tried extensively to find out who was responsible for this disgusting act. They combed the area with scent dogs, they knocked on the doors of homes around the area, and they offered a $5,000 reward for anyone that could identify the person that buried Matthew that day. But they were never able to get the answers that they were looking for. It has been said that later that same month, an anonymous woman called detectives told them that she was the mother and asked them what charges she would be facing before getting spooked and hanging up the phone. Detectives said that they strongly believe that the mother was just a scared teenager. Does that give her a pass? I'm going to go with a hard no. Because even as a teenager, you should know that this is not what you do. So no, I don't think that gives her a pass. Matthew was adopted by a family in Orange County, lived a beautiful life in very large part to Azita. His father, who has since passed away, was in the military and later worked in law enforcement. His mother worked in the fields of education and law. Matthew studied journalism at Santa Monica and El Camino colleges and has plans to study at the University of Arizona with dreams of becoming an entertainment lawyer. It wouldn't be until the age of 17 that Matthew would find out the real story of his birth from one of his relatives. He says that finding out this information hasn't changed any feelings of his life, saying that he lived a great life, he was adopted into a great family, and he couldn't ask his parents for more. In regards to his birth mother, Matthew says, "If this was your best idea to leave me here, then thanks, because you weren't mentally fit to raise a child." It's very mature. This is very mature. Fast forward 20 years, and the mother of one of Matthew's friends contacts a radio station, explains his story to them, and asks if they would help him with a 23andMe DNA kit so that they could find out more about his biological family. So the radio station agrees to the test, and Matthew agrees to hear the results on air with Ryan Seacrest. That's when a producer of the show decides to try and find Azita and reunites them on the show on Matthew's birthday, 20 years to the day that she saved his life. And as you could imagine, it was incredibly emotional. Azita handed Matthew a bag of clothes that she bought for him as a birthday gift and a card that read, "Happy birthday, baby Christian, mountain angel Matthew." Azita and Matthew even went to the spot where she found him all those years before. And when the two got back in the car, Matthew turned to Azita and said, "This could have been my grave." I feel like I got. To which Azita replies, "You were wanted." This is such an amazing story. It really, really is. And this one really, really touched me. Babies are just so innocent and they are so perfect. And I can't imagine how anyone could hurt something so little, so helpless, and so perfect. All right, guys, if you are still here, thank you, thank you, thank you. I love you and I appreciate you so, so, so very much. Please like, subscribe, and comment if you haven't yet and you feel so inclined to, because it really, really helps me out and I could really, really use the help. And until next time, stay safe out there.